All right, guys. Uh, this section is going to be a bit of an excursion from section 1.9. And basically, I just want to, have a little bit of a review of the paper so far. So far, we're really talking about the notion of the truth predicate, right? The truth predicate. And what it really means. The truth predicate is, namely, just what we mean when we say is true. And according to section 1.9, 1.8, and also 1.7, maybe not 1.7, but 1.8 and 1.9 is really where the author really introduces notion of what we mean when we talk about the predicate is true, or the truth predicate. According to the author, when we say that a proposition or a statement is true, we really are asserting some sort of commitment, norms, or obligations, right? Yeah, is fundamentally about normativity. It's about what we ought to do, right? And in section 1.8, the author is asserting that, the truth predicate cannot be merely warranted assertability, because warranted assertability, that notion is too thin. That the author said that we need to add, in addition to that, some sort of norms of assertion and commitment, and that he introduced this notion specifically to solve the problem of how do we distinguish a statement that has the true predicate versus a statement that doesn't have the true that doesn't have the truth predicate. Namely, how do we distinguish statements that are just purely an expression of opinion? He asks us to imagine, like, suppose that you're in a restaurant, of customers, and each customers are yelling out their preferences. So each of the customers are yelling out a statement, right? So what makes some statements or some perspective more valued than others? He is saying that, well, the truth predicate, in some sense, give certain statements more honorific, more more commitment, or more. It makes certain statements more honorific in a sense that it distinguishes them from, say, other statements that are merely just stating expression of opinion, right? So his theory is known as, he called this the expressivist account of a normative notion of truth. So his notion is his notion of the truth predicate is that it's normative. So he, according to the author, right? View is the author's view is that the truth predicate is normative. And what do we mean by normative? Normative is about how we ought to behave, or how we ought to, let's say, respect people with a PhD more than, say, someone that doesn't have a PhD, or how we ought to, say, respect teachers in our society versus compared to non-teachers, for example, right? It's like when we say that, say, let's say we make statements S1, S2, S3, S4, right? And suppose that in S2 we say that S2 is true, is mere So when we say that S2 or statement S2 is true, we are really saying that S2 is S2 is expressing is expressing something beyond mere opinion. My mere opinion, but is honorific. But that being said, normativity as a concept is really about how other people perceive that statement. There are one can ask, so what does normal speakers of, let's say, English, how do people use the word is true, or how do people use the truth predicate? And according to the author, it's like, okay, whenever a statement is express the truth predicate, is really trying to elevate that statement to something beyond mere expression of opinion that is more honorific than other statement. So that's how you can kind of resolve the disagreement between people, or maybe highlight the disagreement between people, because some statements is true whereas some statements are not true. Because those true statements are more honorific compared to the statements that doesn't have the truth predicate. Okay, but is he justified in thinking this? Is he justified in thinking that the truth predicate is merely normative? Is my own thinking is that he is not justified. I think that when people say, or when people use the truth predicate, it's not really just about making that specific statement more honorific, or it's not just about our obligation to that statement. It is not how, nor is it about how we ought to behave when we hear someone say that that statement is true, or that whatever statement is true. We give that statement more respect compared to other statements. I think that the true predicate is really expressing a ontic notion, right? What do I mean by ontic notion? It is expressing what there is. Basically, ontic concepts would be concepts like what there is. Questions about what exists. Does a cat exist? Does a dog exist? Does table exist? Do you exist? And this is a wholly different set of questions than how we ought to behave, which is about normativity. So, and we could argue that maybe the truth predicate is actually one of those basic concepts in ontology. So, truth predicate is fundamental in ontology, right? And true predicate is fundamental in ontology. I would maybe even say that, when we use, there exists symbol, or there for all symbol, or the universe symbol, right? They are ontological notions. And I think this is how most people, or how vast majority of the people in the world use the truth predicate. They use the truth predicate to denote that whether something exists or something not existing, rather than being a way to elevate the statement, to be more honorific, or it is about the true predicate is about how we ought to behave, when we talk about such a statement, right? Is expressing, the speaker is expressing what it exists, or what there is, and the true predicate is really a fundamental primitive idea in ontology, and I don't think that the author is capturing what every person, or every man, or every layperson convey when they use the true predicate. And this is my perspective.